Ano Hana. Grief, trauma, and the coping mechanisms we rely on. Warning: spoilers for the entire Ano Hana series. Ano Hana, or The Flower We Saw That Day, is a wonderful 11-episode anime series centered around themes of friendship, trauma, and grief. The story revolves around 6 childhood friends who call themselves the Super Peacebusters. Jintan, the fearless leader; Menma, the lively, talkative airhead; Anaru, the introverted shy girl; Yukiatsu, the calm, collected cool kid; Suruko, the logical and calm glasses girl; and lastly, Popo, the shy and awkward runt of the litter. Their close friendships and innocence were both lost when Menma slips and falls into the river while looking for Jintan, subsequently drowning to her death. Following this, the Super Peacebusters eventually all drift apart, and we find ourselves at the beginning of the anime, 5 years after Menma's unfortunate passing. We see Jintan in his room, skipping school for the upteenth time, but something's different. He finds what he thinks is a hallucination of an older Menma, how she would have looked if she grew to his age. He refers to Menma as a summer beast, a manifestation of his stress and trauma, choosing to ignore her initially. However, as he gradually warms up to her, Jintan starts making an effort in helping Menma fulfill her wish, while also reconnecting with the rest of the Super Peacebusters, bit by bit. It is through this lens that we are able to observe the daily life of Jintan and the Super Peacebusters that we realize that everyone has been affected by Menma's death, and how adopting various coping mechanisms have led them to form the personas they have now. Jintan: Grief and Depression. Yadomi Jinta, otherwise known by his childhood nickname Jintan, was one of the Super Peacebusters most changed by his childhood trauma, as he experienced not just Menma's death, but the death of his terminally ill mother in succession. Grief is defined as the response to the loss of someone, usually through death. While this understandably impacts people significantly, it is a difficult but natural process to work through. A very common characterization of the stages of grief is the Kubler-Ross model, detailing 5 stages that people usually undergo sequentially. You have denial, not accepting the reality of the situation and either choosing to completely reject this or believe in a different narrative. When denial starts to take its toll and can no longer be maintained, people become angry and frustrated, lashing out at the people closest to them and channeling these unwanted sad feelings into aggression. Bargaining comes next, which usually comes with an element of guilt. We sometimes see people making bargains with God to trade their life for that of their lost one, or to bargain for more time with them. When their attempts ultimately fall onto deaf ears, the grieving individual then undergoes a state of low mood or depression, despairing at the recognition that their loved one is truly gone. Not all bad experiences last forever, and eventually the individual learns to accept their loved one's death and moves on with their life, and with that comes a stabilization of their emotions and psyche. Some people are unable to move on, and it is in a state of depression that we first meet our protagonist, Jintan. In the flashbacks, we see Jintan as a 10-year-old kid who's naturally bright and charismatic. We learn about the circumstances of Menma's death, and that various members of the Peacebusters egged on a love confession from Jintan to Menma, leading to Jintan overreacting and calling Menma ugly before running off. Menma chases after him, and while searching for him near the river, ends up slipping. Jintan carries this guilt with him since, and blames himself for Menma's death. This was further worsened by the death of his mother, and as his childhood friends had commented, he became harder and harder to talk to and approach. As Jintan approached middle school, he fails his entrance exam for a college prep school, settling instead for an academically unimpressive school. Jintan then gradually starts to miss a few days of school before he stops attending school outright. From the flashbacks, the Super Peacebusters describe Jintan as an amazing person, not just fit and a leader, but also smart. And we see glimpses of that when he teaches Popo about difficult kanji characters. In depression, it is common for people to experience low mood, a lack of pleasure in things they enjoy, and severe tiredness. It can also affect your sleep, appetite, and cognitive abilities. Jintan had become a shell of his former self, and had the extra burden of not having been able to express himself or share his feelings with others due to the immense guilt he feels. Jintan spends his time being cooped up in his room, playing video games, and surfing the net. Enjoyable hobbies and interests now become a pointless, uninteresting way to pass time, and the outside world and specific experiences are avoided because it reminds him too much about Menma. Anaru and the repression of the self. The second member of the Super Peacebusters that we are introduced to is Anjo Naruko, affectionately called Anaru, when she comes over to Jintan's house to drop over his assigned homework. The way Anaru presents herself is very far removed from her childhood self. Her shy, bespectacled demeanor is gone, replaced by a fashionable, contact lens-wearing woman with a prickly and cold attitude. Anaru, as a child, was often described as someone who goes with the flow and is easily influenced by the people around her. Since young, Anaru has always had a crush on Jintan, and her insecurities about herself and awareness of Jintan and Menma's chemistry manifested as jealousy towards Menma, as evidenced by her attempting to peel off the sticker that Menma gifted to her and pasted onto her gaming console. This acts as a root source of her guilt and trauma, as she was one of the Super Peacebusters who initiated the question about Jintan liking Menma in the first place, and in her mind, kicking off the sequence of events that lead to her death. As a result of her experiences, we see that Anaru has distanced herself from her past and tries to repress everything that she was, including her love of games and comic books, as well as her previous appearance. She focuses on changing her outer appearance and befriends people who she identifies as the opposite of her old self. Through her interactions with her two outgoing friends, we see her as a yes man, being afraid to express her true opinions and feelings. This can be seen as she coyly tries to defend Jintan's truancy before staying silent, and again when she was peer pressured into attending a karaoke session due to her friends threatening to cut her off from their friend group. Anaru still clearly cares for Jintan, but it is clouded by a veneer of feigned disinterest and almost frustration of his current behavior. She wants to help and connect, but can't find the strength to pull away from the persona and lifestyle she has crafted for herself. Yukiatsu and the projection of undesirable feelings. Although there is an impression that all was well during the golden age of the Super Peacebusters, problems between the friends were already present, and no one else best exemplifies this brewing issue than Matsuyuki Atsumu, otherwise known as Yukiatsu. From the beginning, Yukiatsu has been shown to be jealous of Jintan. He views himself as inferior to him in every way, and similar to Anaru, this problem is further exacerbated by his attraction to Menma, who, he is aware, likes Jintan. When he is told that Menma's ghost reappeared, he chides Jintan, insulting him for his poor academic achievements and general unproductive lifestyle, asking him rhetorically, "You're still dwelling on this stuff?" and calling this pathetic. Later on in the story, during Menma's search party, we realize that Yukiatsu had bought a wig and dress and was dressing up as Menma in response to the knowledge of Jintan being able to see Menma's ghost. He wanted to prove that Jintan was not special, and to end what he viewed as a painful farce and reminder of a past he would want to otherwise forget. When Yukiatsu gets caught and his actions revealed, he expressed tearfully that if anyone should be haunted and cursed by Menma, it should be him. Yukiatsu's flashback reveals that as Menma chased after Jintan, Yukiatsu stops her and confesses to her with a gift: flower-shaped hairpin. Menma becomes flustered and runs off, telling him that they would speak later. This moment never came, and Yukiatsu blames himself for riling up Menma and causing her to slip and drown in the river. In order to cope with feeling inferior towards Jintan, Yukiatsu distanced himself from the rest of the group and proceeded to work on his academics and physical fitness. He is successful academically, as the second smartest in class in a college prep school, jogs regularly to keep fit, and we also see several girls attempting to confess to him. However, all these achievements have not served to fill the emptiness and sadness he feels. And we can also see that as much as he insults his friends for believing in the notion of Menma's return, we realize that all these statements were directed at himself, and he too was stuck in the past and projecting these unwanted feelings onto them. Suruko, an aloofness through intellectualization. Surumi Chiriko, affectionately known as Suruko to her friends, is someone who at first glance hasn't really changed. She's still spending large amounts of time with Yukiatsu, is studious, smart, and quiet, preferring to observe than get involved in a conversation. However, this is only on the surface, and we find evidence of a large amount of inner turmoil as we find that Suruko was jealous of Anaru, as in her mind, even if Menma ended up with Jintan, Yukiatsu would still prefer Anaru to herself. These feelings of inferiority and helplessness mirrors how Yukiatsu feels in comparison to Jintan, and we see that Suruko shuts down a lot of her emotions by intellectualizing and breaking down her choices and views on the various incidences through the lens of pure logic. Occasionally, this facade slips, and we can see that Suruko continues to be in love with Yukiatsu and gets insecure and irritated when other schoolgirls confess to him, and even worse, having to witness Yukiatsu jokingly asking Anaru out for a date. Suruko still keeps the hairpin that Yukiatsu threw away after his failed confession, and we can see the pain and confusion she has as she holds onto it and tries it on. Surumi also feels guilty towards Menma's death like the others, but more because of the feelings and thoughts she had at the time, and this leads to self-loathing and a closing off of her true feelings. Gentleness replaced by indifference, and her love of Yukiatsu expressed as care for someone who she views as pitiful and requiring support. Poppo, avoidance and reaction formation. Tetsudo Hisakawa, or Poppo, is the last of the super peacebusters that Jintan reunites with in their old secret base. Poppo, at a glance, seems to be doing very well for himself, having become more extroverted and well-built, having decided not to carry on with middle school and instead chose to travel around the world. With each episode of the anime, we, however, slowly come to the realization that there are inconsistencies in his character through sudden bursts of desperation in fulfilling Menma's wish in order to send her to heaven. In a later reveal, we find that Poppo witnessed Menma falling into the river and drowning, and that the image of her drifting further and further away from him is forever cemented in his mind. Poppo travels the world as an escape, and he chooses to adopt and express a completely different exterior to how he is actually feeling, presenting himself as a humorous, cheerful guy without a care in the world, but the truth couldn't be further. Menma, loss and altruism. While it looks like we have covered everyone in the Super Peacebusters, there is one who has suffered loss and trauma as well, albeit a bit differently. Honma Meiko, that is, Menma herself. The events of the series are all brought into motion by the return of Menma. Jintan has commented that Menma is still continuing to act like her old self and views her as immature. Throughout the story, however, we get glimpses that Menma is in fact the most emotionally mature person out of the group. And rather than trying to chase a personal wish, or avoid pain, or linger on and find a way to return, she instead focuses on the happiness and reunion of her friends. This is not a decision she does absent-mindedly, as during her efforts we see her break down every so often, crying and expressing her frustrations that she would love to speak to her friends and spend time with them and grow up with them, but she understands she can't, and that every moment she stays on is time that her friends and family would be unable to move on with their lives. In a way different from her other friends, Menma too is mourning a loss. The loss of her life, her friends and family, and her future. But she persists, and through igniting a spark in Jintan, gradually reunites the Super Peacebusters and changes their lives for the better. The Super Peacebusters continue to grow closer with each other through various activities to fulfill Menma's wish. Playing video games together, having a barbecue and a search party for Menma's ghost, and working together to launch a firework. We fast forward swiftly into the final episode, where upon fulfilling her wish of Jintan's mom's requests in making him cry, Menma gradually disappears, and the finale is presented to us in a game of hide and seek, where the group all reunite at the top of the hill, finding handwritten messages addressed to everyone from Menma. We then start to view these messages and what they mean to the members of the Super Peacebusters. To Suruko, I love how gentle you are. For Suruko, the reliance on intellectualizing and distancing herself from her feelings have made it difficult for her to express her own feelings and the care for other people that she has been trying to hide. Suruko continued to slowly shed this demeanor as she reconnects with her old friends, showing more care for others and ultimately making the decision for Yukiatsu to confront his trauma with the group despite risking his friendship with him. In the end, Suruko comes to terms with being able to express all sides of her emotions, including her feelings of insecurity, jealousy, and guilt, thus being released from the burdens she had been carrying by herself for so long. To Yukiatsu, I love how you always work so hard. Yukiatsu was someone who, in his feelings of insecurity, continued to work hard in order to one-up Jintan in any way. This became warped into an unhealthy obsession to succeed, as well as narcissism. This all starts to fall away as Yukiatsu was able to share his feelings of guilt and longing for Menma to the rest of his friends. Menma's final message serves to remind Yukiatsu about a personal trait he has that she admires, and to not lose sight of the efforts that he has put in, and to value himself more as an individual, separate from comparison to other people. To Popo, I love how funny you are. Popo, at the beginning of the story, is racked with survivor's guilt and trying to forget this by pretending to be cheerful and unaffected. As we see Popo's desperation and worries come to the surface, we also notice that Popo is able to express his feelings and not just relying on a toxic level of positivity, cheerfulness, and optimism. Through this message, Menma was able to address Popo's worry that Menma resented him for his inability to rescue her, and reminded himself to continue to be genuinely happy and jokey, rather than faking it. To Anaru, I love how you're always so level-headed. During an incident at a fast food restaurant, Suruko commented that Anaru continues to change herself to the situation and that she continues to let people easily affect her. Anaru is able to appreciate this and over time return to her true self rather than be swayed by peer pressure. She demonstrates that her love for games never really left and tries to be more honest and gentler towards Jintan and her friends. Anaru's jealousy towards others and tendency to go with the flow made her jealous of Menma, who was unapologetically herself. However, in Menma's final message to her, we can see that Menma took notice of Anaru's presence, describing her as level-headed, viewing her adaptability as a positive trait and part of her, rather than the external values observed by her schoolmates. I love you, Jintan. It's the I want to marry you type of I love you. Jintan closed himself off from his emotions and the outside world. We find out that Jintan's mother's request to Menma was to have him not hide his feelings and to cry at least once. This can be interpreted as Jintan opening up his heart again. And through his natural desire to help his friends, Jintan regained his former self and grew as a person, returning to school again, socializing with others in his part-time jobs, and opening up to his friends about his feelings. Menma's final message is not just a confession of love, but that the person she loves is Jintan, his true self, and by extension, that he should also love and accept himself from now on. With the fulfillment of her wish, Menma unfortunately starts to fade away, but this time, the farewells are not just one-sided. Everyone expresses their love to Menma, and as she eventually fades away, Jintan manages to confess his love and gratefulness in fulfilling her mother's wish. With everyone managing to achieve closure and say goodbye, we then get snippets of the Super Peacebusters' lives in the epilogue. Jintan starts going to school with Anaru. Yukiatsu and Suruko grow closer, and as for Poppo, he continues working on his part-time job and also tries to study again. With their bonds reconnected and their sights set on the present and future, the Super Peacebusters no longer try to deny or ignore the past, and the once negative memories turn into bittersweet ones. And while they may not be able to recall its name, they are sure to remember Menma and her final message of wanting to be friends forever, whenever they notice the flower that they saw that day.